Hey, how you doing? This is John, and welcome to John's Long Box. I'm here with one of my favorite comic book creators of all time, Walt Simonson. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you, John. How are you doing?
I am on cloud 9 right now. We're at cloud 10, cloud 11, cloud infinity. I'm like fanboy gushing right now. So forgive me
Well,
for stammering.
we'll take care of that before this interview is over.
Yeah. For first off, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Yeah, man, and I know you just moved recently, and so how's everything going?
Not badly. The house no longer looks like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is pretty much how it looked up until, well, a couple of months ago now. But we've been here 6 months, so we've had time to clear some stuff. We had about 500 boxes of stuff to start with. I think we're down to about 70, but now we're out of bookshelves, so we got to build more shelves before I can clear those 70 boxes.
Oh yeah, you're talking to a hoarder too. I have a picture that I always show when anybody talks about Raiders of the Lost Ark. So just indulge me a second. I will. Oh, of course it's not showing up.
No worries.
But oh, I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. But this is my hoard. It's of course it's not, but this is right behind me.
Right.
This is my comic book room. So
not unlike the one I used to have.
Oh, what did you do? You sold all your comics, gave them away, or
I sold most of them before we moved. I'd had them for a million years. I finally said, I don't need to move them one more time. A lot of them I had for reference, and now with all the digital stuff, you don't need them for that. I've kept about 2 long boxes, maybe 3 of the comics I had when I was a child. I've kept a lot of those, Dell Comics, Gold Key, Classics Illustrated, a lot of other ones, oddball ones. And then I kept the complete run of Thor for old time's sake. And I have some other ones that are kind of in storage that I have not decided what to do with, old Marvels. I haven't decided what to do with those yet, but they'll probably be gone after a while. I have too much stuff, and the house we moved into was a little smaller than our old house.
Yeah, I had all my stuff in storage. I'm not joking. Since 1993 to about 4 years ago, all my comics, my records, my CDs, and stuff. And during COVID, I moved out here to this house, built it all up, and I finally have everything in one room where I can walk around and touch. So people like, you don't have kids. What are you going to do with your comic books? I'm like, I'm going to go out Viking style and burn this whole house down with all my.
Well, that's what I tell people. Ask. I have a lot of my old artwork. I don't have all. I have most of it. I've given a few pages away to charity auctions. I've traded a few pages with friends, and I've sold a couple of pages here and there when the price seemed right. But mostly, I have the work I've done, and I'll get asked, "Well, what are you going to do with all that stuff when when you die?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to have my friends take all these boxes, all these bins of artwork, and they're going to take me out to a meadow somewhere." And they're going to pile all the artwork up into a large pile. And they're going to kill a dog and put the dog at the bottom of the pile and put me on top of it, the dog at my feet. And then they're going to set fire to it and send me off to Valhalla.
There you go, with all your original artwork.
I say that, and a lot of fans will go, "Is he serious?" So who can truly say?
Yeah. There was an old show called 6 Feet Under where a comic book fan was being buried with his favorite super expensive comic, and then all of his friends were trying to break into the grave to steal it.
Oh no. Well, I won't have any comics in the grave. It's okay, boys and girls. Don't have to try that.
So Paul Chadwick, who is another one of my favorite creators, he does a comic called Concrete. He asked me to ask you, so ask Walt about this. About 15 years ago, he told me he kept all his originals except for a single Dr. Page Fate, a mountain of art I've heard since he started letting them go. How does he, part 2, because he's a writer, we've got to pontificate, manage this? 100 pages a year trickled into heritage, holding back for long periods in an event auction. What's the smart approach?
I don't have a smart approach, Paul. I don't have one. What I have done, I did sell a Dr. Fate about 1977. It came up for auction recently. The guy who owned it apparently finally sold it through Heritage. In my case, like I said earlier, I've given some pages away to charity auctions. Nowadays, that was some of my old originals. Nowadays, if I do an auction, a charity auction, I tend to draw a new drawing rather than use one of the old ones. But I gave away some, or I had a couple of them. I was offered what at the time seemed like a fair amount of money, and eventually I thought, yeah, okay, I could sell one for that. But it wouldn't be something I wouldn't sell them for that. I wouldn't unload everything. I haven't gone through Heritage. It's all been to private individuals mostly. I sold one page for Gene Scrocco, Greg Hildebrand's wife. Greg just died.
Yeah.
We were down actually there. We're holding a viewing yesterday in New Jersey. We went down for that. We could see Gene and say goodbye to Greg one last time. And she persuaded, I sell some work through her, but the work I sell are my structure drawings. I do a lot of, I should have put a bunch of that stuff around me somewhere so I could show you. And of course, never crossed my mind. But I will, if I'm drawing a figure on a board, let's say a figure about so big, get my hands in here, like about 6-8 inches high, or whatever. I'll do a rough pencil drawing on copier paper, and then I will work out the structure for it, get it where I want it, and then put it in the light box, which you can kind of see behind me. That's the light box right there behind me, and my drawing board next to it. And I'll put it in the light box. I will trace it off, and that way I can trace off pretty cleanly. Don't have a lot of construction lines in the drawing. I make adjustments. Sometimes I really don't do digital stuff, but I have a Xerox machine. I got a copier, so I'll blow a drawing up or I'll shrink it down, whatever I need to do to get it where I want it. And because it's on a separate sheet of paper, I can move my drawing board around a bit, and I can compose that way. So I'll do individual figures and compose as I go along. I mean, I have a general idea. I've done a thumbnail of the panel already. So those structure drawings, because I do dozens and dozens of them for every job I do, I used to just throw them out. And then, I don't know, 15 years ago, one of my friends got very wroth with me for throwing it out. So Steve said, you should keep these. And Steve was like 6'2", about 3 times wider than I am. And I said, okay, maybe I'll keep these. So I kept them. But of course, they really pile up after a while. And Gene and Greg and I and Wheezy all became really good friends. And Gene runs a website, Spiderweb Art Gallery, I think. Spiderweb Galleries. Sorry, Gene. And there, she sold Greg's work, and she had 2 or 3 other artists she worked with. She eventually persuaded me to let her have some of the structure drawings, and she has sold those, usually fairly inexpensively. I think on the theory, like that first tostada, you have one, hard not to eat more. So they're fairly inexpensive. And the idea is that you can collect artwork that's not going to cost an arm and a leg, and maybe get in the habit. Maybe you will spend more money down the road somewhere. So I've sent her a lot of those. I still have, and because of the move, I discovered another couple of bins of those things, which I still have to sign. I'll probably try to identify them. At this point, I can't always remember where they're from. Sad, but I understand how that works.
Yeah.
And so I'll send some to her. So those I've let her sell. She persuaded me to sell one old cover I had, and the price was right eventually. And so I said, all right, I'll do this. So I did sell that, and I've sold a few others here and there, but really it's the way I collect artwork. I've never been a serious collector of art. I've got some very nice pages, but I didn't go out and decide I'm going to be like some of my friends. I've got several friends who are art collectors who are quite serious about it. And I'm serious, but I'm very random. So 1,000,000 years ago, and I mean in my early stage of my career, I came across a page from Magnus Robot Fighter #1.
Oh, wow.
At a convention. And, back then it was like $20 or $30 or whatever it was. And I bought it. So that's kind of how I don't seek out guys especially. I kick myself for not buying Bernie Wright's and Swamp Thing when it was inexpensive and out there, or more of Frank Miller's work, or other guys. But I just don't do it in a coherent fashion. So that's the way it is with selling my work. I mostly don't do it. I do have most of my pages still, but I will occasionally sell a page, or more likely, I traded a Thor cover to David Mazzucchelli many, many years ago for a really nice Daredevil cover. So I feel I got the best of the deal. I'm hoping he felt he got the best of it. You'll see.
Well, he doesn't have that many comic pages, so
No. So it's as random as that. It's not. I don't really think about it. I'm not sitting here plotting my next move as how I'm going to ship stuff off to Heritage. Sometimes I get an offer out of the blue. If you're out there listening to this, please don't send me any offers. I'm not looking to sell stuff at the moment. I'm still trying to get organized, honestly. We have kind of organized a lot of stuff, but there's still a lot of stuff that needs a lot of work, and we will literally be years organizing stuff. We were in our old house for 36 and a half years. So we had time. Even then, not everything was organized, but a lot of stuff was in pretty good fashion. But, we had the movers packed our house. I mean, we packed a bunch. We packed probably 100 boxes. They packed 400, and we got the whole house packed up in about 2 days. And now here we are 6 months later. Well, a lot of things are unpacked, and some stuff's kind of in order, but a lot of stuff isn't unpacked, and a lot of stuff isn't ordered yet. I've got some shelves where I have all the Asian stuff I've got, so it's books on how to draw manga, all the Lone Wolf and Cubs from Dark Horse, all the Samurai Execution from Dark Horse, other things. I'm not even sure those are in order. They're all in the same place. I'm not sure I've gone in yet and ordered the volumes. So it's kind of like that. I try to put stuff in some places and organize it that way, but stuff's not alphabetical. It's not really, or chronological, whatever ways you would organize stuff. We'll get that done eventually, I hope.
I've been in this house for 4 years. We still have boxes, Yeah.
Yeah, I'm figuring we had boxes in our old house at least for 5 years. Because we didn't have that house did not have a basement, didn't have an attic, and we had a back room where I eventually played video games all the time, or some of the time. But we left the extra boxes back there. We literally had boxes up to like about 4 feet off the floor and filling the room. And then after about 3 or 4 years, my parents decided to come for a visit. And we went, oh my God. And so we were unpacking stuff. We were firing stuff in the corners. We were building bookshelves. We got that room painted. That was the last room we hadn't painted. So we got everything done. And, it's like being a freelancer. You get a deadline. It's wonderful how it motivates you.
Yeah. Yep. So, I'm just looking at all the people. Like Fabrizio says hello. He has a wonderful comic called Horace H. Hoover. He's a big fan. This is my friend RJ from the Fourth Age. He is perhaps your biggest fan in the world. Like me and him talk comics once a week, and your name comes up every week. And we both agree that your Thor run is perhaps the greatest comic book run of our lives. And my friend Jimmy and I, we bought your comic when it came out monthly, and like excited talked about it every week. So Jimmy, I was a hardcore comic collector. Jimmy got 3 comics, yours being one of them. So when I called him up, I told him that you were going to be. He canceled his plans. He's watching you on the big TV right now.
Oh my gosh! I better comb my hair. Jeez, if it's going to be high def.
Pressure's on, Walt. Pressure's on.
It is.
And I know Don talks about you and Louise all the time. All you, everybody loves you, Walt.
We're not that interesting. I can't imagine what you talk about all that. And I don't have that many. We don't have that many comics coming out now. We still have comics or things coming out from time to time, but I don't work anywhere near as fast as I used to. And I've taken a couple of years off from Ragnarok to do just other things that have interested me. And I've reached a point now where I've begun. I hate to do this as a freelancer. We've begun turning work down. I have begun turning work down. I get asked to do variant covers and such every so often. And they're a lot of fun. Usually they're fun to do. They're interesting characters, guys I haven't drawn. I just did a cover, just came out. The image just came out on the web within a week or two. It was some Fantastic Four with Kang and Doctor Doom. I assume it's a miniseries. Don't really know. And I got to do a cover with the FF on their time sled, something I invented when I was doing the FF in '89. And Kang, a big head of Kang. And as far as I know, I've never drawn Kang before professionally. Somebody here will deny that, and they'll tell me where I drew him, but I don't remember doing him before. I've done him
every time anybody makes a statement.
Well, somebody knows, and they know a lot more than I know about my stuff. But I have drawn him in, like at conventions. I'll be asked for a sketch of Kang, that sort of thing. But so there's an Avengers cover. Maybe it's Avengers 24, not sure, which is a big head of Kang with his hands kind of reaching out, a Kirby thing reaching out, and the Avengers are down, smaller figures down below him. And I was really beautifully colored, nice yellow highlights on one side of the head, one of my favorite covers. And so I did kind of an homage to that cover. It's a big head of Kang. His hands are below him like this, at the bottom of the cover, and they're in front, right? As if he's going to grab the time sled. So it's not the same drawing, but I got to a big head of Kang and big fingers, and it was kind of fun.
I'm just going down. All of these comments of people who are just saying thank you, they love your run. And my friend Jimmy wanted to say this, that the Death of Scourge pages were the best he ever saw and read. You know, I still do get emotional when I think of Scourge holding the bridge, you know, with the two machine guns. Oh man,
I like that scene. That worked out really well. I was really pleased with that. There's a poem, "What Horatius at the Bridge," and I don't know if anybody out there. It's on the web. It's from in the 1800s, maybe. It's a long time ago, and it's a story about Rome was being invaded by the Etruscans. There's at least one traitor Roman official, and the Romans learn that the Etruscans are coming, but the Etruscans are on the other side of the Tiber River, which is in flood. So the Romans knock down all the bridges, so the Etruscans can't get across. But there's one bridge, maybe it's better built than the others, I don't know, but they're still knocking it down when the Etruscans show up. And they're not going to have it down before the Etruscans can cross it. So Horatius and two other friends, whose names I don't remember, go to the far side of the bridge, and they hold the bridge against all comers. It's just wide enough so three of them can fight, and they hold the bridge against everybody. And then finally, the Romans, who are knocking the bridge down, but knocking off the beams, knocking stuff out, bopping around, and they yell, "Get back, the bridge is about to go." And the other two guys dash back. And Horatius, being concerned that somebody still might try to get across, although by that time, how many people could get across, he stays there, and the bridge collapses. And so he's now in full armor on the wrong side of the river. And the Roman guy, the Roman traitor, is delighted, and they call upon him to surrender because obviously he has no chance against, a million Etruscans. And so he turns, I think he throws his shield, maybe his shield and the sword into the river. I don't remember for sure. And he gives up, he gives up a prayer to Father Tiber to take a Roman soul, to guard a Roman soul this day, and leaps into the river. And everybody goes, "Oh." And a moment later, out of the raging water, his head breaks the surface. And he manages to swim across the raging river and reach the other side and get pulled out. And everybody's so impressed by this and so blown away by his ability and his courage that even the Etruscans break into applause and cheers that he was able to do this. So I read that poem a long time ago. That poem gives me goosebumps to read.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to do a scene. I was trying to do a scene that partook of some of that energy and some of that emotion in the story with Scourge. And also, in a way, it gave me a lot of room because before that, Scourge he was a pretty minor character with a fabulous Jack Kirby design. He looked great. So, but he didn't have a lot going on, and it just meant that I could do a lot with him in a very short period of time without anybody going, "Oh, well, he would never do this," or get comments that people would be cranky about it. Everybody just went, "Wow, that worked out great." So that was a scene I was very happy with.
Now, of course, that was done in the movies. What did you think about the movie version?
Probably the less said, the better. I thought Carl Urban was phenomenal he was one of the few guys that wore a real Jack Kirby costume. Yeah, he wore one because they wore pretty much the straight Executioner outfit. And Idris Elba looked great in his Heimdall outfit, where he just looked like he owned it, as did Carl Urban in Executioner. I thought that it was fun to see the scene. Frankly, I thought I did it better.
Yes, you did.
And I gave it more setup. And that would be my one complaint in the movie. It was not especially set up. It was still cool for the moment. It was great to watch it for the moment. But I thought as part of a story, like I said, that's all I had to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that you're a big fan of mythology. So would you say?
Am I? Yes,
I
I
don't
am.
know, I'm making stuff up, Walt. Come
Oh,
on.
good. Fine.
Play
Go
along.
for it.
You know, were you like a kid into mythology? Like, because to me, I always, if I, you know, to me, if you're into comic books, you're into mythology. To me, it was just grand superhero stories, you know?
Well, I did like mythology as a child. I had a couple things happen. One, when I was in about fifth grade, I had a couple in elementary school. I had a couple of combined classes. I guess they were maybe low on teachers and or how that worked. So I'd have a class where it was both fifth and fourth grade, and a class that was both sixth and fifth grade. And in one of those years, maybe the fourth grade class, so that's hard to keep them straight, I came across a textbook that I would give a nickel to find now. I have no idea what it was, but it was like reading for kids. But not, it wasn't like, you know, See Spot Run or anything like that. It was like real, you know, prose, like YA stuff in a way, what before it was called YA stuff. And they had the story Beowulf in there. And it was the whole story. I mean, it wasn't a long section of the book. It was just one of the stories in the book. But they covered Grendel, they covered Grendel's mom, and they covered the dragon at the fire-breathing dragon at the end, and told the story of Beowulf. There were some illustrations. I only remember that there were illustrations. I do not remember what they looked like. It's one of these I'd love to see the book again. Whatever it was, I'll never find it. But it was, and it was an anthology read. The whole book was an anthology of a lot of reading for children. And so I came across that. It was probably the first legendary hero that I can remember. Although I was reading, fourth grade? I'd been reading some comics by then. I was a comic book reader pretty early on. One of my friends, I had a very good friend named Jay Langeninger, and Jay he lived one block over. We both drew pictures. We both built plastic models. We both took piano lessons from his mom. He was a couple of years ahead of me because he got piano lessons really early. And we're both Cub Scouts. So we were good pals. And we both read comics. And he had a little pile of comics. All right. It's hard to get, you know, I'm not far enough back to do my hand gestures. But he had probably about a foot pile of comics, which back then was a lot of comics for a kid. I had something similar. And you go back and in those days, nothing went to plastic bags. Nothing was kept pristine. We just read the comics over and over and over and over and over. Yeah. And one of the comics he had turned out to be All-Star Western 60, I think. Took me, thanks to Kurt Busiek, I found out what it was because I didn't know what it was for like decades. I read as a child. This was a long time ago now. Jay was my best friend, and when he was 10 years old, he got developed leukemia. And back in those days, that was really a death sentence.
Yeah.
And he was sick for about 6 months, and then he was gone. I will say, when you're a child and time stretches out, it seemed like a long time from the time he got sick to the time he died. But, and after that, obviously I didn't see the comic anymore. And so it took me a long time to track it down. But I still think of Jay every so often. We were such good buds. And I still remember the models he built. He built some of the Aurora, I think it was Aurora, suits of armor that they used to have. They're about a foot tall. And good memories, really. And eventually, thanks to Kurt, I remembered the plot of the story. I did not remember anything else about the comic other than it was an anthology with several stories. But I remember the plot of that particular story quite well. As I look back now, I'm going, wow, I really did remember it. And I was describing it to Kurt. I put a thing up on the web, actually. I said, here's the story. If anybody can tell me what this is, I'll do him a drawing. If I identify what comic. And within less than 24 hours, I think less than 12, Kurt was on it and said, yeah, probably All-Star Western, probably a Don Caballero story. And he didn't know the specific thing, but he said it was sounding, and there were only like 6 Don Caballero stories, I think. He was a very minor character in All-Star Western. And so I went to the DC library. They kindly allowed me to go inside, look at the bound volumes. Alan Asherman was keeping track. And I went through it, and I went through all the All-Star Westerns and found it. I was flipping by and went, wait a minute. And I flipped back, and that was it. It was the story. And it was had a lead story, the Trigger Twins, who were a feature for a while in All-Star Western, drawn by Carmine Infantino. And it had a really lovely job, which I completely did not remember, the best job in the book, bar none, by Alex Toth. but I totally did not remember that as a kid. The El Fuego story, the story of the flame with Don Caballero was the story I remembered. And it was signed Eli in the front, which I only, when I got the comic and was looking at it at DC, I realized who had drawn it. It was drawn by Gil Kane. Because Eli was his original name before he took Gil Kane as a name. So Eli Katz, I think. Sorry, Howard, if I'm wrong, you can correct me. And so can a million other people listening to us right now. But it was early Gil Kane. Honestly, it turned out it came out when I was 4. So I guess I was reading comics by the time I was 4 or 5, which means it's early, very early Gil Kane. And it's from the early 50s. Looks much more like a 40s comic with very tiny panels and sort of small storytelling. And once in a while, you'll see a head, especially not an upshot, but a 3/4 profile head that will say Gil Kane. If you'd handed it to me and I looked through it, I might have guessed Gil. I'm not sure if I would have or not. But knowing it's Gil, you can see some of the tropes that he used and the way he drew were developing. But he was a long way from becoming the Gil Kane that I knew. And I was able to. And then I was at Baltimore Con once. I'll go there every year, but I don't know, 20, 25 years ago now. And at the end, it was much smaller. At the end of the show, there was really nobody around, hardly. I got up and walked around. And I went over to the dealer and began looking through his long box of Western comics. Flip, 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 flip. And suddenly there was All-Star Western 60. I think 60 is right. I've got to go double check. But, and it was $20, but, at the end of the show, he sold it to me for 10. It was not a mint condition comic, but that was my holy grail of comics. That was the last comic I had never found and was still trying to locate. So thank you, Kurt Busiek. I'm indebted to you forever, even drawing notwithstanding. And it turned out, I also thought about it afterwards. I did talk to him. I talked to Mark Waid, and I described kind of the same amount of stuff, and he instantly went to Don Caballero. So I just had to find the right guys who knew the stuff cold to be able to find that comic. And eventually
Kurt knows his comics, man. I had a forum back around 2010, and there was 35 members, and Kurt Busiek joined, and we used to talk comics, So go figure. He found my silly little forum with one of 35 people, and it got nuked. I wish it got destroyed, Those upgraded the software and it destroyed it.
Well,
so
Kurt keeps track.
So you were a comic fan since 4 years old.
This is what happens to me is I wander off on the subject and leave it. Yes. So I read those from 4 on. You couldn't buy a lot of comics. The nearest comic book place to us was about 3 miles away in a big Prince George's Plaza in Maryland. I grew up in College Park, Maryland. And there were stores there a little bit later. Maybe it started in 61 or so. So I would go over there for dinner some nights. There was a Hot Shops cafeteria, which we liked. My mom liked it. My dad traveled a lot, so my mom took us over there occasionally to have meals. And they had comics in some store there. Do not remember what the store was. I've totally forgotten. We'd go through, and either mom would buy us a couple of comics, or we'd blow our allowance. I remember the ones I remember buying there for sure were the Adam Strange Mystery in Spaces, which I got there. But I got other comics as well. And the comics, I read everything. I didn't discriminate. I am one of those guys whose mom threw out his comics later in life.
Oh no.
And mom, when I ended up doing what I'm doing, my mother could not apologize to me enough for and I said, Mom, it's fine. And it was fine. I didn't care. I did have, I don't regret it because what would I do with it now? I had the original Supergirl issue where she flies out of the spaceship and, hey, Supergirl, I'm Superman. I'm just as strong as you or whatever.
My dad,
and I think Metallo is the main bad guy in the back of that story, back of that issue, rather. So I'm kind of sorry not to have that, except that really I'm not sorry. The only 2 comics I went and bought later that I knew I had and had gotten tossed out, it was the Walt Disney adaptation or the comic book adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And it was the comic book adaptation of John Huston's Moby Dick. Both, I know Moby Dick was from mid-50s. I'm not sure about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And both of them were drawn by a younger Frank Thorne. I love the art. It was stuff Frank. It took me years to find out it was Frank Thorne, but I bought those 2 comics just because those are ones I missed. I loved them. And I also I didn't get this one. I bought a new copy, well, a mint copy or a better copy eventually. There was a movie about that same time called Helen of Troy. Robert Wise directed it. It's a combination British-Italian production, I think. So you get some guy, Jack Cernus, I'm not sure it was even his real name, who played Paris. They made Paris of Troy the hero. In the Iliad, he's kind of a creep, or at least in the stories, he's kind of a creep. But he's the hero in the Iliad, and Rosanna Podesta played Helen, and they had a bunch of English. Sir Cedric Hardwicke played maybe Priam. I haven't seen it in a long time now. And I have Stanley Baker's in it, so it's a mixed Italian-British cast, and that was my introduction to the Iliad and the Odyssey, of any of that stuff, and to Homer. And in the comic, it was beautifully drawn, beautifully inked, and it turns out years later I looked at it and went, oh my God, it's John Buscema, which it is. Yeah. It's really beautiful, John Buscema. He thought he had inked it. We talked about it once. He thought he'd inked it. I think that's not true. There's another sword and sandal comic adaptation with Kirk Douglas as Ulysses, I think, and I forget who else. And he did that one, and he clearly inked it. It's all brush inking, very clearly, John. This other stuff is probably pen. It's very fine, very different from the other stuff. I'm not saying maybe it's not. My guess is Sal probably inked it, but it was just gorgeously drawn. The funny part about it was I didn't know anything about the Iliad at the time or the story of Troy. That was my introduction. And at the end of the comic, Dell Comics are good comics.
Right.
Those, all you old people watching this right now will remember Dell's Pledge to Parents that was on the back of the comic, because they weren't part of the comic book code authority, but they had their own pledge. They were stricter. If anything, they were stricter than
like Hebrew National. They answered to a higher authority.
They answered to a higher authority. And so at the end of the comic, they would do this with long comics. The next to last page was on the inside back cover in black and white. And then the last page was on the back cover, and the bottom lower right had the Dell's Pledge to Parents in it. And so I read the comic. I loved it. And I went to see the movie. I went with some friends. I'm kind of surprised I was allowed to go, but I went to see it. And it was, hey, as a kid, well, I know, it looked great. Big sword and sandal movie. But at the end, when Troy is burning and Paris is roaring through the crowd, all the fighting guys and all the stuff happening, all the clamor and the clangor, and I think he finds Helen. And then, as I recall, this is a spoiler alert. If you've never seen the movie and you're going to watch it, turn the sound off right now, because I am going to tell you what I remember happening. Whether it did happen, I don't know. But as he just gets to her, somewhere in there, somebody runs his sword through his back, and he dies. And Helen, of course, gets sucked back to Greece. Well, in the comic book, that's not what happens. In the comic book, he finds her and pulls her out of the melee, and they zip down to the quay of Troy with one of the boats to get away. And they look back at Troy, and it's burning. And Helen says at some point, from henceforth, I shall be known as Helen of Troy. So when Paris got the shaft in the movie, I went, what? 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 He was like the hero of the story. I go, what? I couldn't believe it. I completely freaked me out. I've never forgiven Homer for making Paris such a creep and killing him off. Well, he didn't really kill him. I don't think he got killed in the later stuff. But anyway, that was so I got into some of that stuff early on. And then my parents had a book. They had a 2-volume set of mythology. One of them was Roman and Greek, and one of them was Norse. And they were from about 1893.
Okay. Which,
when I was a child, isn't as far away then as it is now. And actually, let me think. It's probably 93. Yes, it's farther. I'm farther away now from my birth than I was at my birth from those books. Just so you know. So, but they were texts. They were not for kids. They were prose books, and especially the Norse book, which I read, was liberally sprinkled with quotes from the Elder Edda and the Younger Edda and some of the sagas, the poetry, a quatrain here, a couplet there. They had some what I regard now as really humorous illustrations. They weren't meant humorously. Illustrations, Thor and Odin with his spear and all that stuff. And they're all, they're wearing kind of Wagnerian Greek or Roman or helmets with giant wings, all this stuff the Vikings never wore. And they're all pretty much posed like classical Greek statues. They have a real Greek flavor to them. Not robes and all sorts of stuff that aren't very Viking. But they were still cool, and I loved them, and I loved the book. And I think I may have loved them. The whole idea that the gods would die at the end of time was really startling to me. That Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods would occur. And I don't know whether, especially when you're young, death is a long way off, mostly. And so it doesn't have any real meaning exactly. So the fact that, and in most mythologies, most of them, the gods live forever. But in this one, they don't. In fact, they got older and they had to eat apples. They had to eat fruit of some kind.
There was real threats to them.
So it was very cool. So whether that's the reason I liked it so much, I could say that my grandparents on my dad's side came from Norway. So I can claim a genetic link to the Norse myths, although I hesitate to say that. Well, I said it, but I maybe not. But so that was my introduction to genuine mythology with those books. And I loved them. And I had other books, more kid books that I got that had the story of Odysseus and the Sirens, for example, and stuff like that. So I absorbed all that stuff and just loved it. So we can go back and talk comics now. That was my long way today. You only have to ask about 3 questions and we'll be out of time.
Oh, I'm loving it. You reading the chat about
I'm talking. I can't read and talk at the same time, so I haven't seen any questions go by. If you have any questions you like, pull them up.
I was going to say, first off, this is how long I've been a Thor fan, since I got this at 7-Eleven. So Odin. So now it's a pencil holder. But my very first comic that I ever bought with my own money was the Fantastic Four 186. It's George Perez doing the art, Len Wein doing the writing. Right. My second comic is, it's driving me nuts. I can't remember the number now, but I think it's 176. You drew it. It's got Thor smashing the Destroyer on the head.
That's like 2. That's the one that Len Wein wrote. I did layouts for a year in 1977 and 78. I did 12 issues plus an annual after that. And they were mostly inked by Tony DeZuniga, and Joe Sennett inked 2 of them. And he inked several of the covers, including that cover. I was looking at it the other day. I don't know the number either. It would be somewhere around 276 or thereabouts, 277. Yeah, not really sure, but I know the cover you mean. I always love Destroyer. Destroyer is my favorite Thor villain, along with Loki.
RJ for the Fourth Age was saying that he loves your story where the Destroyer. What number is that? Is that 286? Where towards the end of your run when
you my one I wrote and drew.
Yeah.
Last one was 382, so probably 381 had the Destroyer in it. 380 was the Midgard Serpent issue.
Yeah, I remember that when I remember picking that up in a spinner rack in the gift shop in the hospital when my little brother was born. Oh. Or maybe it was my little sister, because my brother was born with Fantastic Four 202. So it shows you how I equate real life important events.
I totally get it.
I don't ask me what I was doing when I got Avengers 200. I don't.
My mom either.
My mom doesn't want to know, but But I think every major comic book fan does that. They associate like past events with comic book. But I remember that.
Well, that's not to be comics. I read Lord of the Rings when I was a freshman in college, and I was reading it on spring break. And when I went back to college, I was up in New England, and I took a train up to Springfield, Massachusetts, and then I took a bus on to the college, which was 20 miles north, or whatever it was. And I was reading the book furiously on the bus, and literally as we pulled backed out of the station in Springfield and got set to started heading out, I got to the part, a spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read the Lord of the Rings or watched the movies, I got to the part where Gandalf and the Balrog fight, and Gandalf falls into the great chasm in Moria. And I can remember going, what? What? I completely freaked me out. I remember exactly where I was. I remember anywhere else I was when I was reading that book. I know right where I was when I hit that passage, and I just totally lost it.
Now,
I'm sure everybody in the bus moved further away from me at the time.
There's a guy screaming in the back.
Yep.
I didn't even think of it until you were just telling me the story. But when Odin and Surtur are fighting and they both fall into the pit, is that, you think, inspired by, or subconsciously, or on purpose?
Oh, by that? Well, all I can say is I knew the Lord of the Rings pretty well. There's other stuff I was influenced by Tolkien with when I was doing Thor. I don't know if that one, I had to get rid of Surtur somehow. He's pretty big. Yeah. And I also wanted to give Thor a break from having his dad around, because when Odin's around, you always figure he can bail Thor out if Thor's in real trouble. But that's why they had to invent the Odin sleep, so he could be sacked out when Thor got into problems. But basically, I did have a way of bringing Odin back. I did not stay in the book long enough to do that. I wanted to leave him gone long enough so it would look kind of like, wow, maybe he's really going to be gone. But I had a plan to bring him back. Never got that done, which is kind of too bad. I thought it was a pretty good plan. I've used little bits of that story elsewhere now, so I wouldn't be able to go back and do it untouched. But whether the Moria scene had anything to do with that scene or not, I don't remember now. I don't remember if that was. The one thing I got from Tolkien specifically was because of all the appendices, it was clear when Tolkien created the story, he created the whole world around it. And so you had, the history of the First Age of Middle-earth, history of the Second. They weren't novels, but they really told what went on during those periods, the Silmarillion. And what that did for me was it suggested, especially the kind of stories I tell, I sort of view that the core of the story is like, I won't be able to do this very well, but it's like a woven net, and the weave is very tight, and they're all different characters, and they're all interacting, and they're all doing whatever they're doing in the story, and things are happening. All of it comes together in that weave right in the center. And then as you get away from that center, the weave starts to be further and further apart. The skeins become further and further apart. But I want to leave the impression, okay, so we're having this big fight here, but if we leave and see this one character, we'll follow that skein out off over the horizon, and the skeins get farther and farther apart. But you have the impression from that there is more to the world than just the tight weave that you see there in the center. That if you only were able to follow some of that stuff, you'd be able to find whole new stories. As in Tolkien, maybe we could find out what happened to the Blue Wizards who came over with Gandalf and Saruman and Radagast when they came from the far west into the east, into Middle Earth, to stand against Sauron. And there are two wizards who are mentioned as the Blue Wizards and never turn up anywhere, and nothing is known of their fate. I think there may be some notes that suggest they may have been seduced by Sauron. I have no idea. Yes. But there are a lot of things like that where you get far enough away from the center. We don't see Radagast the Brown's life, really, in Middle. He interacts with Gandalf a couple times. He's in the movies, kind of a weird, goofy thing that I thought seems very out of tune with the rest of the films. Yeah. But just me. So, but you kind of wonder, what was his life like? But there he is. He's got enough hints about stuff that you sort of feel, only I could follow his thread, I could find out more about it. And it's quite possible Tolkien knew a lot more about it. So I want to give the impression in the comics I do, this is especially true in Thor, it's pretty much any comic, if I'm on a comic regularly, I'd like to give the impression that if only we could step outside this nexus and go over the hill out beyond here, we would find more story. And there'd be a whole nother story, a lot more stories to tell. So that's how I try to construct the stories. And I really got that idea from Tolkien.
I got to say, like, when you were talking about this, a character that you was Eric. Why can't I remember the old man who glued the box back together again?
Roger Willis and his son. I can't remember his name either. Yeah. Maybe Roger was the son and the other guy was the father. I don't remember. I think Roger's the guy that glued it together. The father was the other one that Malekith killed. But I don't remember his name.
I love those characters. I love the last Viking that prayed to Thor.
Oh, Elif, the last Viking.
Yeah.
I think Kurt Busiek told me once he may undo this. It's okay, Kurt. I'm putting words in your mouth. I think that was his favorite story, The Last Viking, and that story with him was his favorite story. So I like that story. I thought that that's one where I like the page where the Valkyrie's horse comes for Elef the Lost, and you can, the other Valkyries are accompanying him as they thunder across the sky above the city, and nobody sees the giant figure of Odin behind him as they welcome Elef the Lost into Valhalla. And I like that when Thor fires up his pyre with his hammer, having tossed the body of Fafnir the dragon at Elef's feet as if he's the dog. Right. And I like that scene a lot. That seemed fairly Viking to me.
Yeah, there were so many great scenes. Like, first
I'm
off,
going to jump in here just for a second. This is an unheralded and unasked for plug.
Sure.
There is an artist writer named Matt Smith, been doing some Hellboys with Mike fairly recently, and he's written a comic. He has a character called Barbarian Lord, and he's put out a few. There's at least one graphic novel. There's some short stories. I'm not sure how much more material there is. There's not a lot. I gotta say, the best Viking-related saga kind of material I've ever read in comics. There's plenty of other stuff I haven't read, so I can't say it's the best of everybody. But Matt writes the way sagas are written.
What's the name of the book again?
It's called Barbarian Lord. And his name is Matt Smith.
I got to look that
I'll
up.
write this down.
Yeah,
but there's one where he has the Vikings have a thing called fightings, where they badmouth each other. It's like trash talking. If you would trash talk me, I would trash talk you back. It'd be a contest. And there's one of the poems is Loki bad-mouthing all of the Asgardians at a feast one day. Thor's not there, so he kind of gets away with it. And he's bad-mouthing them all. And in one of the Barbarian Lord stories, the Barbarian Lord and another guy engage in one of these bad-mouthing contests. And boy, it just reads like a Viking saga. It's just great. So anyway, that's my unsolicited plug. We now return to your Reggie schedule program.
I don't know if I'd want to be in a disc contest against Loki. I don't know.
He was good. Well, it's one of those things in the poetry where he refers to like things that the gods were not perfect. They weren't like the exemplars that some gods in some mythologies are. They screwed around. They did this, they did that. And Loki reminds them of all these terrible things they've done. And what's interesting is several of the things he's reminding them of are stories we don't have. We only have a fragmentary part of a lot of the Norse mythology. And so some of the hints we get are in that particular poem, but you have to extrapolate, or hopefully somebody will find some more ancient manuscripts buried in somebody's attic, and they'll be able to get more stories.
That's one of the things I daydream about is like we have so much Greek mythology that's missing. Like we can't read the Mycenaean linear Greek. We don't, and as I went to Iceland because I was really inspired by Norse mythology. I went to Iceland and I was reading some of the, and that's the first thing they say is it's completely incomplete. There's so much, we probably know a tiny fraction of all the myths.
Yeah.
And then as a kid reading about the burning of the Library of Alexandria, I'm like, I always fantasize about what was in those books, what was in the rest of these myths, so much great stuff that's lost.
It was a joke I just saw on the web. They had 6 little blocks of color, and it said, if you can't read a number inside this block of color, this is what's going on. And it'll say you're angry, you're tired, you're something. And there are 6 blocks. You can read all of them except one. The one at the center bottom, there's nothing there. It's just a color block. And it says, still angry about the burning of the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, I still am. Yeah. Yeah. I was just about to say before that there's one thing I always wanted to do is
Barbarian Lord, someone has put up a link.
Yeah, Marcus.
Barbarian Lord. So for you guys out there at Amazon, just so you know. Good stuff.
I collected Thor almost from the beginning. Thor was one of my favorite.
What was your first issue?
The first issue was your issue, 265, and then I just went back and bought all of the back issues. So I got from, Journey into Mystery 83 on.
Oh wow!
And then when 337 comes out, your Beta Ray Bill. I just remember I don't like change. Comic book people don't. And I was like irrationally like upset by this, and I refused. I was like, I'm not buying Thor anymore.
Yep.
It lasted 1 month, and I had to pay $6 to buy that comic book.
Oh yeah. Well, you got to change for a little while. It went for about 25. Then it went back down to something reasonable.
But I will say, I made up for my love for Beta Ray Bill. This is one of my prized props that I bought.
I had to buy one of those myself. You don't get them for free. So, but I saw that was really nicely done. It really is on model for the hammer I drew. It was Steve Jeppy's company, I think. Whatever they put out that stuff along with the distributor, but they do stuff to sell. And I saw that and I said, screw it. I mostly don't buy the stuff based on things I've created. I kind of feel, send me the goddamn toy. But they don't. I mean, nobody does. I get it. But that one I looked at, I went, oh crap, I have to buy it. So I did. I don't have it up on the wall yet. It's still downstairs in a box, but eventually I'll hang that on the wall here.
Yeah, Marcus says he got 337 in the mail with the subscription. I have to say, I remember sitting. My grandfather was diminishing, as they say in the Hobbit, and I remember sitting in a rocking chair, and he was sleeping, and just to read, and I read it to him. He probably doesn't remember, but I just remember the thing. I always thought this was legendary, and my friend Jimmy will back me up on this. Was the story going on, and then every once in a while, Surtur with Doom building. Oh, yeah. And I remember when people say, "Why do you like comic books?" And I'm like, "It's because of stuff like this. This was like mythology for 60 cents. Well, $6 if you bought it late, like I did. But I could not put that down every month. It was so good. And then you went from there. You went to the Fantastic Four.
I did.
And I mean, if you did that Fantastic Four run before the Thor, people, I just think that Fantastic Four run that you did kind of gets glossed over because people love that Thor. But your Fantastic Four run was so good. You like you said, you created the TVA, which is now like the everything.
Who knew?
Yeah.
But that was also I only did the FF for about 15 or 18 issues. Marvel was changing. The company culture was changing at the time, and after a while it became clearer to me. I'm a little slow at the uptake on stuff, but it became clear to me that it was really not a place I wanted to be working. Too much of my energy was being filtered off or siphoned off with stuff that was going on, and I just felt I couldn't put my best thought. I mean, I did stuff in that book I'm really proud of, but I just decided I'd be better off going somewhere else and doing some other books, which is too bad. Other Fantastic Four stories I wanted to tell. Well, that was true with Thor. I got off Thor about 2 years before I wanted to. I had other stories I wanted. I mean, I was going to bring Odin back after about another year or two. And I kind of wanted to stick around long enough to do that. But again, the way things were around the miasma in the air, I just thought, I think I'm done doing this for now.
I would have loved to see more of your Thor. More. There's one thing that I always remembered, and I play role-playing superhero games, and I stole your idea whole cloth. The Heisenberg the Heisenberg compensators when they were in this fantastic car going through the dimensions. So Reed just said, adjust the Heisenberg compensators.
Isn't that the Kurtzberg compensator?
Oh, was it Kurt? There you go.
Because that's Jack Kirby's original last name.
Oh,
that's why it's called that.
So there you go. I unwittingly changed it that way.
Well, Heisenberg's a good model for uncertainty. I mean, that's true. That's
there you go. I changed it.
So that's why you used Kurtzberg. So that was funny. That was also kind of working with John Byrne did one of his Alpha Flight issues. I think had Snowbird in it, and she has a fight in the middle of a blinding snowstorm. So John just had maybe as many as 6 pages. Somebody here will remember. I don't remember for sure. With nothing but word balloons because it was like snowblind. Everything was just covered in snow.
Issue 6, I think it was.
Which, of course, was hysterical as far as not having to draw anything. So I did one where they were getting sucked into a black hole, and they got away eventually. So I just had black panels for, 2 pages or something like that. I was dumber because I started to ink the panels. So that was still trying to, not go over the blinds and around the balloons and stuff. So I was dumber doing that than John was, but it was still, that was kind of inspired by his snowblind stuff.
Yeah, that was the assistant editor's month, so he got away with doing something.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I another run of yours that is legendary, and I had to go and get the comics, was your Manhunter run in Batman. You know,
I'm sorry, say it again now.
The Manhunter. Did I?
Yep. No,
Yeah.
you got it. I was looking at a comment over here, and apparently I can't read and listen at the same time.
Yeah, me too. That's if when you see me stop, it's because a comment.
Yep.
The fourth H says my first Thor was 333 with the beautiful Sienkiewicz cover, Thor Dracula.
Yeah, it's right before me.
Yep.
That was a nice cover. I remember that. They went through, I think, several writers. Alan Zelenitz wrote a few of the issues right before me. I don't know if he wrote the one right before me, but he did write some. I don't think that many, but I could be wrong. It was long ago.
So I was looking for a comment, but it's so many comments doing it by so fast. How is it like working with Archie Goodwin for Manhunter?
Oh, well, the best. He was the best. So I worked with a lot of good writers since Archie. Archie, one of the first writers, not the first, one of the first writers I worked with. I've worked with a lot of really good writers since then, and I don't mean to offend any of them, but for that time and place, might not happen if we were both. If Archie were alive now, we're working together again. Might not be true, because a lot of times it's time and place and who you are at that moment that helps you fit together. But we fit together in a way that both of us really appreciated as being special. I had a talk with Archie toward the end of our run, and I think he went off to work for Warren. He left DC and went to work for Warren for a while. Had been there earlier, went back, and we finished off Manhunter when he was at Warren. I'd be going down to Warren to give him pages or get pages back. So that was pretty funny. But we were discussing it. We both kind of thought, man, once this is over, it's too bad we can't just both retire, because we kind of felt that we really were peaking on this stuff. And I think I did. I'm not sure Archie did. He had a lot of peaks, but we worked together. I mean, when that book, those stories began, the early chapters were done full script, and then by the end of the last chapter, and probably a couple before that, they were being done Marvel style, which is to say, Archie would give me a plot, I'd break it down, give it back to him. I could not tell you where we changed over, but somewhere in the middle of the run we changed over. So we worked both ways. But I learned so much from him. I mean, I was only in comics about 6 months when I began doing that strip.
Oh, wow.
So that strip, I came to New York in right around August 1st of 1972. And Archie offered me that book or that storyline and regular work in about, I think, I don't know when the first one came. If the first one came out in March, we began working on it in March. You have to go back and look and see what the date was on that, and then figure out when it came out. And then 2 or 3 months before that's when I began working on it. But earlier in the year in 1973. So I've been doing comics about 6 months. I began doing Manhunter. So I was extremely lucky and to have Archie and to have that strip. And it was my interest. The kind of strip it was, this adventure strip, was very much my interest at the time. So it worked out pretty well.
So what was your first mainstream comic work then? I always thought it was the Manhunter. So
no, I did a few oddball one-off stories before that. My very first story in comics was Cyrano's Army in Weird War number 10. Has a cover by Nick Carty, a long lead-in story by Alex Toth, and then this little backup in the back. And that was the first comic I got paid for by any company that I cast a check and it cleared. I had before that, probably some months earlier, I had illustrated. I'd done a single illustration, like long and thin. It went next to a column in a pulp science fiction magazine, probably an Amazing. Might have been Fantastic because they were sister publications. I don't remember which one, but I'm thinking Amazing. Don't remember the issue number. But it would have come out in mid 72. That was for Ted White, who was the editor of the book at the time. And a friend of mine, Jay Haldeman II, wrote a short story. And because I knew him, I got to draw a little picture, a little black and white illustration, the way other pulp magazines used to have black and white illustrations in them. And so that's my first publication, my first picture in a professional magazine. However, I was never paid for it, and I never got the artwork back. So I don't count that exactly as my first professional work. And before that, 1964. Yep, 64. I did a drawing of a robot fashioned after the style of Russ Manning, and I mailed it in to Magnus Robot Fighter, just as for the heck of it, really. And a few months later, the fall of 65, or the very early 66, issue 10 came out, and in it, of Magnus, and in it, there is a page halfway through called Robot Gallery or something like that. And it was about a half dozen fan drawings. Somebody had drawn, some girl, I think, had drawn a fashion drawing of Leisha wearing a different outfit than the one she normally wore in Russ's work. And there was a little robot, some guy, a little round robot, not too unlike whatever the name of the robot is in the last Star Wars stuff. Although it had a little head on it, but it was very much like that. And had a couple of arms. And I did a drawing of a guard robot, which had a busy plate and a ray gun attached to his arm and a little jet pack underneath. He could float around, apparently. And I had my Simonson signature, my dinosaur signature on it, because I was doing that from summer of 63 on. And they printed that as well. So that's my first printed drawing in the comic book. There was no offer of any money. It was just fan stuff. I'm sure nobody expected any. Later, when they only ran 2 or 3 of those pages during Russ Manning's run on the book, and I think in the last one, I'm not sure, but I think in the last one you can find the drawing by young Alan Weiss is in there somewhere. So, stuff, it just came along very slowly, but eventually I got a gig, and then I did 3 jobs for Gold Key, for Twilight Zone. One of those at least was done before Manhunter, one probably after, one somewhere in the beginning of Manhunter. And I did 3 or 4 other jobs for DC before Manhunter started. I did a job after the Weird War story. I did a science fiction job for Archie for maybe Star Spangled War called UFM, Ultimate Fighting Machine, that a friend of mine who'd just gotten into comics, we'd kind of gotten in almost together. He wrote it, Jerry Boudreau. He wrote it. And then we did a sequel to that within a year called Return. And that became, I think, one of the early crossovers, unbeknownst to the companies, where we had this giant robot fighting machine in the first story, and he gets blown up. But it turns out that the mind module, some little bit of programming from the thing, survives. And it rebuilds itself as another killing machine, but out of organic parts, out of trees and branches and all sorts of stuff. And some guys run into it and they have to fight it. And I don't remember what happens to them. I used Howard Chaykin as a model for my main character in that one, when Howard still had mutton chops. And then Jerry, the machine was destroyed again. Jerry went on, and he was writing Star Trek for a while for Gold Key. Alberto Gialetti was drawing it. And he wrote a story without giving too much, didn't give a specific background from our stories. And it wasn't drawn, it didn't give Gialetti any reference. But basically, the mind module got found one more time, or got survived and developed. And I think the Enterprise had to fight it. I don't remember what happened in the story at all.
It got beamed aboard through a wormhole.
Something like that. But it basically, so we had a DC Marvel crossover, DC Gold Key crossover without anybody knowing. So that may be one of the early crossovers.
There you go. A stealth. You mentioned your dinosaur signature. And
yep.
You were a paleontologist or studying to be a paleontologist?
Well, I studied. I never became one. I saw Fantasia in 3rd grade. My dad took me to see it, and I loved the dinosaurs. I was blown away. I love Night on Bald Mountain too. I didn't see much future in being a demon, but I love the dinosaur sequence for The Rite of Spring. And back then you couldn't see animated dinosaurs much. No. I mean, King Kong wasn't on very often, and there weren't a lot of. Nowadays, you can flip on any Discovery Channel or something. There'll be some 12 programs about dinosaurs, or there's computer dinosaurs zipping around. But I fell in love with them, and so from 3rd grade on, I wanted to be a vertebrate paleontologist and study dinosaurs. And so I was a geo major in college, and then once I wrapped that up, I applied to grad schools, and somewhere in that period where I'd applied but hadn't heard back yet, I decided that was not what I wanted to do professionally. I didn't have any other ideas right then, but I could tell that I was just not built for lying on hot slabs of rock, fighting off black flies with dental picks and getting the skeletons clear of the rock. I thought, yeah, that's just not. And I had done a senior thesis where I had to do a lot of microscope work and look at mammalian teeth. I really wanted to study dinosaurs. Did not have a reptile collection, dinosaur collection. So I did a lot of work on mammals. And that, I think, also kind of put me off. I thought, I can't imagine spending the rest of my life looking at teeth under a microscope. They're important in the fossil record because they survive and they also evolve quickly. So they have the whorls and the loops and the enamel folds in them. You can really differentiate between animals, between mammals, in a way that's not really as true in reptiles. But I couldn't see myself doing that. So I decided to bail on that, and eventually went to art school. I read Marvel comics in my first college career, and I began drawing them drawing my own versions in my second college career. And then I took that work and went to New York, and that was my portfolio.
So speaking of portfolio, can I bring up this piece of art that you sent to me?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so this is something you just emailed this to me earlier today. Look at this.
It's a commission I'm doing right now. The pencils are finished. It's about 5 feet across.
Wow.
And about 3.5 feet high, which is why they're all these figures. And it's the client wanted Marvel's Surtur in scale fighting a bunch of Asgardians. I think he sent me a list. I'm sorry, Sean. I think I've lost the list. I hope they're all in here. I'm not putting any more in. I feel I've done my due diligence. But I added a bunch of stuff from what the original idea was. So you can see Fenris Wolf up in the right-hand corner. He's actually fighting Loki. I've added a bunch of Valkyries. The Valkyries in the upper left. And one of them, I think there's one, the third one in, it has a cape. That's the Valkyrie from Marvel Comics. The rest of them are just assembled Valkyries from Walter Simonson's imagination. So there are 9 of them, which is one of the numbers of Valkyrie you get.
Yeah.
Them, right? And then Thor and
there's
and then a bunch of other Asgardians below them.
Yeah, there's Thor. Yeah, I could see Hogan the Grim down there on the bottom.
Yep. There's Hogan. Actually, to the behind Surtur, you can see Sif and Beta Ray Bill right behind him, or just above his, and to the right of his.
Oh, leg. Yeah, okay.
So they're over there, and I mean the Warriors 3 are all represented. Balder, Tyr is actually in there, but pretty well cropped. Heimdall the same way. They're kind of behind some rocks. The Enchantress, the Executioner with his M16s.
That will.
The Norn Queen is in there. Those are the ones I can remember offhand.
There's so many great moments in your, like when Loki gets his head cut off, and then just he says,
"That was credit where credit's due." That was really Chris Claremont's idea.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was in this was the advantage of going to the office. You can't do it now. Well, maybe you can go, but you won't. It won't be the same effect or the same creative juice flowing. Back in the old days, you went to the office, you saw the editors, you ran into a dozen other freelancers, all of them were turning in their pages. And I was in one day, and Chris was often there. And that's why you had to live in New York City or thereabouts, because you were literally turning your pages in or turning your scripts in. And I was doing that story, the Balder Loki story, and I was describing the plot to Chris. And at the end, initially, I think I had Balder driving his sword into the ground right beside Loki's head, clipping his ear, but not really. And Chris said, "Man, I thought he was going to cut his head off." And I thought, hey, that would work great. After all, Loki's a magician, so sorcerer. So that's really, I credit Chris with having that idea. I'm not sure Chris suggested with the idea that, I should do it. But hey, once it was out there, it just seemed like a natural. Yeah. And I really liked the way it came out.
I saw this question a few times, so I figure we'll ask this. Are you going to take Ragnarok to Kickstarter or crowdfunding? Or
I don't know yet. I am going with Scott Doomberry, who's my editor on Kickstarter, on the Ragnarok with IDW. He has now left IDW, and I'm going to go with him. So this is all pretty recent. So it's not at all clear how Ragnarok's going to come out in the future. I do have about 4 more storylines I want to do, maybe 5, let's say 4. And well, actually, maybe it is 5. So, but exactly how they be published or through whom, Scott may act as a packager and somebody else will do it, or maybe he'll put it out, himself. I'm not sure. That's all up in the air. At the moment, it's not slated for a Kickstarter. Okay. I'm not saying that won't happen down the road, so don't call me a liar later if it turns out to go that way. But it isn't the current plan. But the current plan is only about, some thoughts, but not much more of a plan.
Yeah, I love that series. I felt like a kid again reading that. I was like, this is like the unofficial continuation of your Thor run. It was.
Don't say it too loud. I don't want Marvel to get after me.
I don't know, but I got a spinner rack right there that I bought, and I had all your Ragnaroks on that spinner rack. And one of my friends, Pete, came over, who's not really a comic book guy, and his eyes went right to Ragnarok, and he was just like, "Look at this art!" And now he's a full-on comic book guy. So it's
wow, well, cool. Well, I credit Laura Martin with saving my ass time after time and doing such brilliant color on that book, and Len O'Grady on one issue as well. So. That makes a big difference. Good color makes all the difference.
RJ from the Fourth Age wants to know, are you interested in Conan at all?
I just did a Conan story. I wrote a Conan story for a friend of mine, one of my former students. Hasn't come out yet, and I think it will come out digitally rather than in print. But I haven't heard any more about it than that, so I don't really know. It's a fairly young Conan heading east toward what's that, Lake Viliat, whatever the big lake is in the middle of Robert E. Howard's world. I don't remember. But it was just kind of fun. And he was not doing a standard John Buscema Conan or Barry Smith Conan. He was doing, or Barry Windsor Smith. Sorry, Barry. Doing his own character, his own take on the character. But it was pretty cool. And I'm going to have to go back now and with all the lettering in place and actually read it and see how it all holds up. But I did it probably about a year ago. But I got to write Conan, which was kind of fun. I drew him on a cover. I've drawn on a couple of covers back when Weezy was editing the Conan books. And I did a thing called the Hyborian Age that was from a Robert E. Howard essay. It was kind of the faux history of the Earth from the time of Atlantis up until it fits into known history in Sumer and Ur and places like that.
Yep. I saw a comment earlier. I forget who said it, but they said that they loved your Faft and Gray Mouser. Are you a big fan of like these fantasy novels?
Yeah, I read a lot. Well, at the time, I read a lot of this stuff in the old days. I haven't read so much recently. There's a million of them now, but back in the day, there were some early on, and then in the wake of the success of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, a ton of them came out. They reprinted a ton of stuff. A lot of new authors jumped in, and there's a ton of I have not read, but I did read the Fafford and Gray Mouser books by Fritz Leiber. I read the Conans when they came out from Lancer Books with the Frazetta covers. And I read whatever I could find back in those days. I think I read a couple of Thongor of Lemuria books, which were not as good as some of the other ones. But yeah, the Fafford stuff was fun. And the comics, I mean, that's really early work of mine. Those guys, in fact, one of the first things I did is when I came in New York, I met Howard Chaykin, one of the first guys I met. And Howard was living out in Queens at the time, out kind of beyond the subway line, which is pretty far out in Queens. Yeah. And a little house with like this dirt plot in front of it, a big dirt vacant lot, which I'm sure is no longer vacant. Land's too valuable in New York now. And he shared with some other guys. He was up on the second floor, I think. Have to ask him. But he was doing the 3rd issue of Sword of Sorcery with Fafford and the Gray Mouser. And I ghosted a few panels. I went out there and visited him and ghosted a few panels. I didn't draw many people. I wasn't confident in my ability to draw people at the time, and I wouldn't have drawn them like Howard anyway. So I did like a ship's mast and a bunch of other stuff that was the inanimate objects as best I could under the circumstances. But it was fun. That was kind of what comics was like in the old days. It was kind of both an individual sport and a team sport. And it was fun to see what everybody else was doing. You go into the office, Bernie would have some pages of Swamp Thing. He had one page, I've said this before, he had an interior splash page of a werewolf with the guy looking at it. And the werewolf's all covered in Zipatone, a great shading film, and just looked great. Now, if you look at it, I have to go back and look at it again. If you look at it, the guy that's being so shocked by this creature, he's got to be standing in the hole in the floor because his head's right down there on the floor, unless he's a headless guy or a head with no body, which, Bernie could be. But it was pretty funny. But it was still, gosh, it was just an amazing page. And that was one of the great things about going into the office in the old days is you'd come in and you'd see Joe Kubert Tarzans, and you'd see Alex Toth War Stories, see Bernie Wright's and Swamp Things, and all the guys who were doing such wonderful work. And it was very annoying and very inspiring. You go, God damn it, I can't believe that this guy's doing this kind of work. And now I got to go home and get better. And it would really drive you to try and get back.
Friendly competition. Yeah.
It was great. And you could really see all that stuff. Again, I don't know how it is for young guys in comics now, but that's the way it was then. And it really, Continuity Associates, which was a studio Neil Adams and Dick Giordano ran, and that was on East 48th, just east of Fifth Avenue, and around the corner from the Scribner bookstore. And the building's no longer there; it's now a high-rise, a skyscraper of some kind. But it was kind of between Marvel and DC, and as a result, it was kind of the unofficial clubhouse for all of us in comics. So you'd turn in your pages at the office, then run over to Continuity and see who was there and hang out. And sometimes you'd help out with a job they were doing. Sometimes you just shoot the breeze. You'd see work that Russ Heath was drawing. It would just knock your teeth out. It was great. So
do you think
it was a good time to be in comics?
Do you think it's bad now that like everybody's working from home, kind of isolated, in their own little islands?
I couldn't say it was bad because it's not my experience. Well, I do it here now, but I'm used to it. But it's not an experience I really had, especially when I was young. So hard to compare it. I don't know how modern kids, sorry, you're all kids to me, how modern kids see it or how they experience it. They do there are a lot more conventions now. So a lot of them go to conventions. A lot of them make a lot of money at cons. Some of them make their principal living at conventions. And you would see, we go to conventions rarely, sometimes 3 or 4 times a year, maybe. And I see a lot of my old friends. I'm delighted to see them. And I don't mind coming home to a quiet house. On the other hand, I shared studio space for a few years with Chaikin and Jim Sherman and Frank Miller and Jim Starlin and Val Merrick, not on Gary Hultgren, not all at the same time, but over several years. And at one point in the studio, Upstart Associates, we had Frank doing Daredevil, Howard was doing American Flag, and I was doing Thor within about 20 feet of each other.
Oh my God.
That honestly awesome. Was very inspiring. You look at their stuff and you go, yeah, screw this guy. I can do better than that. And then you have to go back and prove it. And it was very inspiring. We'd go out for lunch. We were on 29th Street, West 29th, between 7th and 8th Avenue. So just south of Madison Square Garden. And on the side where the Penta Hotel used to be, a block up, there were a million fast food places. So we'd walk out and go get some lunch. It was a Wendy's. For a while, they had potatoes.
Yep, I remember that. Big
fabulous. They had hot sauces and stuff like that to put on them, sour cream. It was great. So I'd have a potato for lunch usually. But we'd go up there and we'd shoot the breeze. We'd argue about comics. We'd talk about comics, what we were doing, how things were going in the industry, what we thought about it. So it was very engaging. And it really, I think, really kind of kept you fresh at the time. So that was just really a wonderful experience that I wouldn't trade. And I mean, there are guys now, and there are people. I mean, people are by themselves more, but there also are still studios. I mean, for a while, Gaijin Studios down south with Adam Hughes and a bunch of other guys, Cully Hamner and some other guys. And there's a couple out west. So you do have the opportunity to hang out with your buddies and trade ideas and see what they're doing. I don't know how common it is, but the experience of going into the company is really different now than it was. And it's, I think it's all digital. You send everything in, you get your scripts back that way, you send the pages in that way, and it would just be different. I mean, whether it be better or worse, I don't know. I do know that Weeze and I both really like the way that was done. The industry, it was a smaller industry back then too, like almost a cottage industry, and it was very enjoyable. We had a good time.
Oh yeah, I just want to bring up this. What a great Sunday treat. John Snowden is asking, did you ever work for TSR, Wizards of the Coast? I love the DC Forgotten Realms Spelljammer series.
I never did. Never did any Wizards of the Coast work. I don't think at all. I think Greg Hildebrand did a bunch of stuff for them. Yes. But I never did I never connected up to him and never did any. So
yeah, I didn't think you did.
I can't help you there.
Yeah. That's why I asked. I was like, does he know something I don't know?
Well, you never know. I did one cover of the National Lampoon of all things. So occasionally weird assignments will come your way. I don't seek them out actively. I've got enough work to do generally, so I don't really go hunting for stuff.
So I was going to ask you this question: like Marvel and DC, do you ever hear from them? Do they ever offer you anything?
Oh yeah, I get calls. I mean, right now, I do get calls from them. I've done a bunch of. I just did this Kang cover I mentioned, the Fantastic Four. I did what was it called? Star Wars, the Inquisitor, who was some character, maybe an animated character, who's dead. I think he's come back for the comics. And I did one of those. I just did 2 Duck covers, a Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge cover, which cracked me up. And that was for Marvel. I did some years ago. I did 3 covers for Archie comics, which was kind of fun. So they do call me up. They do ask if I want to do covers, mostly covers. Recently, because I want to get back on Ragnarok, and I've got to finish that big drawing. I have to ink it still. And so I might start tonight, actually, just putting the border around it. But I want to get that done by the end of the year. I've had that on the book since COVID, so it's been forever. This poor guy's been waiting for it for a long time. And I want to get it finished so I can start the year off fresh. And when I do, I want to start off doing Ragnarok. So when I do that, as a result, I'm not taking any extra work on right now. I kind of hate not to. As a freelancer, man, you hate to say no. Because you're sure you're going to say no, and you'll never hear from anybody again, and that'll be the end of it. But so far it hasn't worked out like that. But it does mean that I want to not take any extra stuff on. And if I see how Ragnarok's going, maybe I'll do an extra cover if I get offered one, something like that. But mostly I'd like to go back to Ragnarok. And I've had a couple of years off, maybe almost 3. So it's about time to get my rear end in gear again.
You tweeted or put on Facebook, I forget, that you did Elric of Melnibone, one of my favorite fantasy series, and I don't know how I missed that. So I went and got some of your books about that. It's like the only thing you've ever done that I haven't read yet. Well, I think Walt fell asleep.
I did. Sorry about that. I'm awake now. I'm back.
Okay.
So, were there any questions that were going by there? I
was asking you about Elric of Melnibone.
Elric. Yeah, I think it's probably Melnibone.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it
on that last thing. But yeah, I did 2 of those with Mike Moorcock that he wrote. One of them was a 12-issue limited series with 3 stories that braided and came together at the end. And each story had a different artist on it. And I did the Rose story, which is related to some later novels that Michael had written. And then we did another 4-issue, what do they call those? 44-page comics. There's some name for them, whatever it is. So long, not a 22-page longer, they're square bound. And we did a 4-issue, which was the making of the sorcerer, or making of a sorcerer, Elric, which is early Elric. It's Elric when his father is still alive and Imrir, the Dreaming City, is still around. So that was fun. I like working with Mike a lot, actually. His work is, for some reason, his work inspires enormous visuals in me. I don't just mean enormous as in really big, but they are, I have more visuals than I can draw. So I draw what I can. And in fact, in the Making of a Sorcerer, I did those twice up, the pages twice up, because it would give me more room to do drawings. It took longer too, so I don't do that again. But I got a lot of stuff into it, and I enjoyed both of those projects. I talked to Mike a lot while I was doing those. We had a good time, and they came out nicely. You have to. They're not written for you if you're just a quick skim reader sitting in the can. You have to sit down and really read those with some concentration, but they're pretty cool.
So we've been talking now for an hour and a half, and is there anything that you
want to say? I'm dozing off here.
I saw you start to doze off, and I would feel really bad.
That's okay. No, it was fine. I do that all the time now that I'm old, so not a problem. But I don't have anything else that I want to. I did. I sent you some links. That basically, I've got a Facebook, the official Walter Simonson Facebook page, which is as much of a website as I've got. I don't have a real website. I may eventually, but at the moment I don't. I'm still on Twitter. I may not be on Twitter much longer. I'll have to see how that goes. I'm also on Instagram, and I'm on Threads, which is the Zuckerberg version of Twitter, which is way smaller. But those are the 4 places I'm on the web. And mostly, I prefer Facebook because, as you can tell, I like to talk. And I write stuff. In fact, I'm about to... Oh, where is it? I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Sure. Yeah, I put... For those of you who are interested, Walt sent me all of his links. They're in the description. So you can check that out. You can click them and interact with Walt.
One of the things about moving is that you find a lot of stuff you forgot you had, which is what I've done. And right now I've been searching for some old files, mostly Xerox of stuff, looking for something. Haven't found it yet. But I did find, I'm about to post this on Facebook. I haven't posted it yet. You guys are getting a preview. Basically, back in 74 or 75, what is the date on this? 75. There was a friend of mine named Chuck Miller, no longer alive, I believe, but he helped found with a friend of his, Miller Underwood Publishing. And they were a small publisher who published small editions, limited editions of things like, what was Jack Vance's, oh man, I've forgotten the name now. One of his created worlds. And he did a sequel to it, which was not as well known. Anyway, there were things like that. They were sort of little reprints of some cool stuff. And before he began that, Chuck decided to print like a chapbook, a little, about so big, a little, probably staple bound, soft cover of a Robert E. Howard short story called The Gray God Passes. And the Gray God, of course, is Odin. And it's he did a couple of stories about Odin that were pretty cool. And so he asked me if I would draw the illustrations for it. So I did like 5 or 6 illustrations. And this is the title page, which has both my lettering and let's see if I can get the light not to shine on it too much. And oh, there you go. And so it's Odin, and then the lettering, which I did myself as well. And last night, I gave these drawings away or I sold them. I don't know. It was a long, long time ago. I've forgotten what happened to them. I didn't either, or I didn't get them back. I'm not sure. But when it came out, Chuck hadn't liked this black line here, this black thing down to the head. So he put a processed gray on that. He grayed it right out completely, which I found kind of annoying. And after it came out, he said, I shouldn't have done that. And frankly, I agreed with him. But that's the way it is in print. And what happened last night, since I've got a few low-res scans, and this is long before scanning. I just pulled images off the web, so like 72 DPI and fairly crappy. And what happened last night is I found photostats of all the illustrations. So I have large, well, not large, these are same size drawings. And I'm going to scan all of them, so I've got a good copy of everything. And I'll be putting at least this title page, or maybe one. I have one other drawing I like a lot. This is toward the end after the battle. Odin, I don't remember the story anymore. It's been so long. But this is Odin walking above the battlefield.
Let's make that big. Oh, look at that. That is awesome.
So I'll probably scan that and put that up as well. And one of the things, you budding artists out there, keep track of stuff you like, or go out and find more stuff you like, because in this one, much of the texture work in it was inspired by a children's book called Rain Makes Applesauce. And it had all kinds of fabulous textures in it. I used to collect kids' books, picked it up. When I was doing these, I went back and looked at it and kind of figured out how to make some of those textures work in the course of my drawings. So anyway, I found those, which I'm delighted to be able to find. I've found a few other things that I didn't know I had. I got some stuff I still would like to find. Don't know if I have it or not. But you move, you find some of this stuff, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm finding stuff. Why did I save this?
Yeah, well, there is that too. I've also got stuff where I clearly have like 15 Xeroxes of the same drawing, and now I'm going to have to go through and gradually, wean this stuff out and get rid of it. But at the moment, I got plenty of fish to fry, so I'll do that. I'll do that in my spare time. Maybe when I retire. When I first found your work, I really only paid attention to like the writer, the artist. Everybody else I didn't care about, like as a kid. And then I go back and I noticed you did a lot with your letterer, John Workman. Was that on purpose? Like, oh yeah, absolutely. Now I have a favorite letterist, John Workman. Well, me too. That's why I do so much work with him. John was the art director at Heavy Metal in 1978. And or thereabouts, 79, and Heavy Metal got the license to produce an Alien graphic novel, an adaptation of the movie Alien in a graphic novel format. So John, as the art director, Heavy Metal printed a lot of work from other countries, especially France, maybe Italy, don't remember for sure. And that all had to be translated. So it was translated, and then as the art director, they were kind of getting a 2-for-1. John would re-letter all the art. I mean, it was on overlays, but he would re-letter everything in English, so he printed in Heavy Metal. So he called me up out of the blue. I probably met him before. He would remember. I don't. But he called me up, and he really asked me if I would be willing to ink Carmine Infantino, if he could reach Carmine and have Carmine draw the book. I like Carmine stuff. Yeah, sure. And I think what happened was, I think he had called Carmine originally and hadn't been able to reach him. Kind of the days before cell phones, pretty early on in the answering machine game, I think. And he hadn't been able to get it. So he talked to me about it. And I think I talked my way into drawing it as well as inking it. Sorry, Carmine. And so when I drew it, I recommended Archie as a writer. I said you should get art, because I wasn't writing at the time. Now maybe I would write it. I wouldn't write it as well as Archie wrote it, but I just saw myself as an artist, not as a writer at all. And so I suggested Archie for the project, and John got a hold of him. He was game to do it, and we were off and running. But then when John lettered it, since he was a letterer at Heavy Metal, and his lettering was quite beautiful. The letter forms are quite lovely, and a lot of his sound effects and special lettering were based on calligraphy and typography, which is what mine are based on in a lot of ways. So essentially, I mean, all the early work I did, a few pages I actually lettered, a few jobs I lettered. Yeah, I was okay as a letterer. I wasn't great. But I did all my own sound effects. Any book I inked, any comic I inked, the artwork, my own artwork up until about 1979, if it's inked by me, those are my sound effects. Because I thought they had more to do with the way my hand worked on the page than if I just had somebody come in and drop sound effects on it. But in John, I found a letterer who could do what I did, I felt, better than I could do it, but in the same direction. So really, when John's job at Heavy Metal was over, by the time I was doing Thor, he wasn't working there anymore. And I got him on board to letter it. Probably the Star Slammers, which was a year earlier. I forget what I was doing in the 80s. I don't know about Battlestar Galactica. I don't remember how that worked out. But from Star Slammers on, maybe from a little before, and then forever after, I've asked John to letter my stuff. He did not letter the FF because he was actually working for DC for a year, so he under contract, so he couldn't really do it. Bill Oakley, the late Bill Oakley, lettered it. Did a beautiful John Workman looking kind of lettering on it. But I'll work as long as the both of us are able to work together.
It's funny that you mentioned Battlestar Galactica. That I always felt that was my comic. Like my friends were all into the Star Wars comics. I wouldn't touch the Star Wars comics because they were different than the movies.
Right.
But the Battlestar Galactica comics, they were so good. And that issue with the, oh my God, I'll never forget it. Starbuck lands and he becomes friends with the Cylon, and now I'm mixing up. The Cylon has that machine gun, boom, 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 and it's got your famous the John Workman boom sound effect across it, and then the Cylon's firing a machine gun. Oh my God, I freaking love that. It's spoiler alert, everybody. Starbuck takes the spool of wire out of the gun and trips him into the.
That's Apollo.
Oh, I'm saying Starbuck
does that, and that is the Cylon Mark III.
Yes,
they don't become friends. The Cylon is trying to kill him.
I mixed up with the TV show. I'm still excited talking to him.
The Cylon's trying to kill him, and that's the one issue that I penciled and inked, and Klaus inked the rest of them. I also colored that issue.
Oh wow!
And at the end, the last 2 pages, Roger McKenzie had been my writer in that book. And for reasons lost to history, he got off. Wheezy was editing it, and he got off right at the end. There was about a page and a half to go, and so Wheezy asked me. We were together by this time. We may have even, I don't know what part of the year that came out. It's around 1980. We got married in 1980, so either we were living together or we were married. So nepotism at its finest. So she asked me if I would finish off the issue. So I wrote about a page and a half, and then she asked me after that if I would write Galactica from then on. And the book wasn't selling well at the time. So I thought, well, good, because if I start doing it and it tanks, no one's going to blame me. If it does well, they'll say, wow, Walt, what a genius. Well, it did not do well, so I didn't get a genius rating out of that one. But it did last another 5 issues. And one of those was a fill-in by somebody else. Maybe Brent Anderson drew it. I don't remember who wrote it. But 4 of the last 5 I wrote. And they were, I got the Academy Award of Comics for those. Because one day I'm walking down the hall at Marvel when they were at 575 Madison. And I passed Archie in the hall. And he complimented me on the writing of the Battlestar Galacticas. As far as I was concerned, that was the Oscar for comics. Not only that, but he said, look, that's my first write, 4 issues of my first writing. He said, I got to write a movie adaptation, but Archie was always busy. He was always behind. So he said, you want to write it? Well, it's a movie adaptation, but how tough can it be? It turns out John Buscema's drawing it, penciling it. Klaus Jansson's inking it. I got a movie script. So the words are pretty much already done. But I said, yeah, sure, I'll take it. It's 3 issues. And it's something called Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I got that gig. So my 5th, 6th, and 7th professional writing jobs was that comic. And then after that, I did my own characters, a graphic novel called The Star Slammers, or just called Star Slammers, that came out in Marvel's graphic novel series.
Yep.
That was about 64 pages. I wrote and drew that. And then somewhere right after that, Mark Grunwald talked to me about picking up the reins on Thor and writing and drawing. Thor was 83 by then, 82, 83. Writing and drawing Thor. And I had done Thor for a year with Len Wein, 77, 78. Hadn't written it. But it just gave me a chance to write it as well. And he and I had talked about Thor some, Mark and I. And I'd had some ideas earlier before I got into comics about stories I would love to do. The Surtur story actually grew out of stuff. I had ideas in 1967. So I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it, which means that Thor 337 was my, 22, 44, 66, 3, 7, about my 12th comic that I'd ever written. So really, it's pretty much the beginning of my I was quite a rookie when I was. I know I had learned a lot from Archie. I'd learned a lot from Len. I'd learned from the other writers I'd worked with. So I knew some stuff, but I was still really new at writing when I took that book over. But it seemed to work out okay.
Yeah, and then people ask you about you work with X Factor.
Mm-hmm.
Did you design Archangel all by yourself? Was that something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wheezy was the writer. She picked it up with issue 6. I pick up a drawing at issue 10. And one of Wheezy's ideas was that in comics, well, this is one of my ideas, this first part, you have kind of an inflation of characters' powers.
Right.
And what happens is, let's say Mr. Hyde fights Thor. Thor beats him. A year later, Mr. Hyde comes back. But we already know Thor can beat him. So now he's carrying 2 bottles of juice to drink instead of 1. Or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. He's more powerful. He'll still get beat, and he'll come back a 3rd time. And so when characters, they repeat, usually have to juice up some. They go from having a really stupid costume, like Paste Pot Pete, and take the name The Trapster, or whatever it was.
You got to level up.
And part of they level up. That's exactly right. And what happens is your hero levels up to match them, but usually without extra power, extra juice, or falling into getting bitten by a radioactive tarantula or whatever. They just beat them. So clearly they are more powerful. And so there's this continuing rise of power in superhero comics over time. So by the time Wheezy was writing X Factor, it was the original X-Men, essentially, the 5 original X-Men. And they were fighting guys in the Marvel Universe who were pretty powerful by then. So she embarked on a campaign, just in the stories, to juice their powers as needed. Now, a guy like Cyclops, you don't have to, because he's he's got beams. You can just say, okay, the beam blew apart a Sherman tank. Now it's going to blow apart a mountain. You just draw it. Same with Jean. She can lift things up, or whatever she does. She can fly, and she can do more of that and more powerfully. In some cases, like the Beast, well, he can jump, 15 feet in the air and grab onto a horizontal bar or something like that. So we need to juice him up, juice his strength up. So she turned him back into the old Blue Beast, and in that transformation made him a lot more powerful. Bobby, he actually begun kind of as a snowman figure and got turned to the solid ice a very few issues into the X-Men originally.
Right.
But you needed to feel he had more juice. So he gets zapped by the Enchantress or the Norn Queen or somebody. I don't remember what happened. Eventually he has to wear a belt that kind of diminishes his power some. This doesn't freeze everything. So he's stronger. And in Angel's case, Angel can fly at about 10,000 feet for like an hour. At least that's what we do in the old days. And that's it's not a lot.
Yeah.
So she decided that we would juice him up in the way we did. And I drew the design for it. We gave him these metallic wings that can fire knife blades, make him an offensive weapon.
Yeah.
A serious offensive weapon. And that was really what happened when she took over the book and began doing that stuff. And that's why Archangel went through hell to come out on the other end more powerful than he had been before he started. And really, you do it that way because you want to make the story exciting. You don't just say, hey, John, we've got this extra, just drink this, you'll be much more powerful, and you'll have this wings, and you'll do other things. It'll be great. So you want to put them in a story where there's a price to pay for that kind of additional juice. And so we nailed him to the wall, cut off his wings. We did terrible things to him.
Yeah, poor Walt.
But he was pretty cool he was pretty cool when he came out the other end.
Yeah. I mean, he was the Aquaman of the team. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then he became a badass.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if I could say badass in front of Walt Simonson. I guess I can.
It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. So, Yeah, well, that was the idea. We tried because he was also this nice guy. I mean, in a way, it's what happened when I was doing Mr. Miracle in Orion. Love doing Orion. The new guy, Fourth World stuff's probably my favorite Kirby work because it's so unrestrained and so completely jack. But Mr. Miracle was kind of a conundrum. That was actually Wheezy who brought this up. We talked about it. That basically, here's Orion, the son of the devil, raised in heaven, and is pretty cranky. He's their fiercest warrior, which makes sense. It's kind of a nature versus nurture idea. Seems like nature came through. Scott Free, who I think in the Kirby issues, we never actually know his real name. Maybe they've given him one by now. But at the time, I believe Granny Goodness named him Scott Free in honor of the day when he would be driven away. He would escape from Apocalypse, thereby breaking the pact and allowing Darkseid to restart the cosmic war that had resulted in the exchange of hostages to start with. So here's this son of heaven, shorn of his birthright, tossed into hell, raised by the devil and the devil's mistress. And when he escapes, he's like the nicest guy.
Yeah.
He's like this mellow guy. They keep trying to pull him back into Apocalypse. But he's like this mellow guy. Why? And that was Wheezy's question. And again, spoiler alert, you don't have to worry about this because I think nobody else at the DC universe paid attention to it because it's a difficult conundrum. But my solution to the problem, to that idea that he was this mellow guy and having his background, how did that work, is he discovered early on in Apocalypse that he himself contains the anti-life equation. And if he accesses it, terrible things can happen. So basically, he had to become a Zen master in order to never access this inner fury that he carries. And that, I thought that was a great answer. No one's used that since I did it, but that's okay. I got to do it. It makes sense to me. The rest of you guys are wrong. But it also makes him a tough character. It makes him, I'm not sure it makes him any easier to write, but
I love that trope. The character that needs the self-control, like Scott Summers. I always like that.
Yeah.
Because if he let go for a minute, he could kill people.
Yep, that's right.
Black Bolt had to not speak and
speak. Yeah.
I love that. I don't think
anybody's done that since I did it, but I thought that was a cool idea. And he killed a whole bunch of people in the Hunger Dogs, I think, and some of the Apocalypse guards, parademons. Inadvertent, that's how he discovered he had the power. He said something and all these guys just died. So from then on, he can never access the add-life equation again.
I can only imagine like the dinner table, you and Wheezy just talking about like all of this like Kirby characters and
Mostly it's more like, we have any more milk? We have to go over there. We got to go to the grocery store tomorrow and pick up some more. What else?
I had Jimmy Palmiotti on, and while we were talking, Amanda opens the door and goes, "I'm going to the supermarket. Do you need anything?"
Yeah.
Here we are talking about comics and everything. It's like, oh yeah, you got to get eggs too.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. That's how it really works.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking.
Are there any other last minute questions we can answer? Or
anybody?
Should we just bail out?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can read some of these. This is small enough type that I
know. We need John Workman here. What does Walt think of Paul Smith's art?
Fabulous. He's fabulous. I mean, Paul came out of animation before he got into comics, and it really shows in his work. Is that beautiful, elegant line. And that's really where Bob Wyacek learned to ink. I mean, he'd been inking before that, but kind of out of continuity studio, a lot of rendering and stuff. He began inking Bob. It turned out that he began inking Paul. It turned out Bob's line was this elegant, sensuous line that was beautiful on Paul Smith. It looked pretty good on me too. So that was great. What art tools are you using these days? Same ones I've used for a million years. Crow quills, Hunt 102 pen, a crow quill, Raphael 8404 brushes when I use a brush. I have recently begun using more markers. I'm using Copics and occasionally microns. Whichever one of the tan ones Well, those Copics or those Microns, whichever one. The tan ones I tend to like a little better than the black ones. And I really like Tombow. There are a pair of Tombow pens that come together and have nylon tips. One of them is a little harder, finer line. One of them is a little softer, a little more sensuous line. I like those a lot. They're available at Michael's. I got them in pairs. And in fact, when I start inking this big drawing, it's pretty much all going to be Tombow ink because I'm concerned. There's no way I've got to have the drawing vertical when I'm working on it. I can't use a pen nib that way. And if I use a brush, I'd be afraid of charging the brush a little too much, making a line have to go and just drip down the drawing, which I really don't want to do. So I'm gonna find out if Tombows will give me what I want. I'll know in a couple of days. But those are most of the tools I use. Use Pro White for whiteout, and I use Presto pens also. Whiteout Pro White is water soluble, so you can't really use it and then lay a lot of ink over it. But for that stuff, I've got Presto pens made by Pentel. They just come with a little squeeze bottle with a little tiny pen tip. You can just squeeze it out in a pretty controlled fashion. So I use paper from the companies mostly these days. But I also, if I'm doing my own stuff like Ragnarok, I use Strathmore 500, which is their best paper. I did get some that was pretty crappy a few years ago. I will say this for them. I bitched about it in the web because it was like drawing on blotting paper. And this is their best high rag content paper. There's no excuse. But somebody I groused about it on Facebook. A lot of other people groused. I got an email back from Strathmore, and ultimately they didn't have any new paper, any fresh. I had to make new batches. Ultimately, I had 3 pads. I bought 6 pads. 3 of them were crappy. And by crappy, what I mean is you put a line down like that, and it veins out like it's on blotting paper.
Oh, wow.
It's like the last thing it should be doing. So I learned how to create blue line drawings from that. I had not done it before, but I had a drawing. I'd started to ink for a cover for Marvel. I did one line and went, oh my God, I can't ink this piece of paper. And then I figured out how to convert that drawing into blue line, print it out on a good piece of drawing paper, and then ink it that way. So it worked out well. But
John Snowden is asking about Weapon Zero and Image. Is this a Walt Simonson comic that I know nothing about?
Well, probably. It's not entirely me. It was really created by Mark Silvestri and David. God, I lost your last name. I'm old.
Yeah, me too. I'm making mistakes.
Crap. David. And maybe somebody else. I'm not sure who was involved in creating Weapon Zero. And then they asked me to hire me to write it. So I began writing it. I wrote about, I'm going to say 13, 14 issues. I'm not really sure. But I did that many. It was fun. It's sort of in the early days of Image. And I don't know beyond that. Not really sure. Give me just a second here. Oh, man. Can't do it. It'll come back, an hour from now. I find I have a much slower retrieval system now. So an hour from now, we'll come back and I'll go,
that's the way I am.
David Wohl.
That name.
It was David Wohl, W-A-O-H. I'm sorry, David. I'm really sorry. But, and as I said, there might have been a third person involved. I don't remember. But I wrote, Joe Benitez drew it. Joe was pretty new at the time. And it was fun. It was very imagey in the way it looked, but with some cool stuff that really made it work nicely. And we did one story, I think, set in ancient Japan, something like that. And he really busted his ass on it to do that particular issue for sure. But so I did a bunch of it, and I really enjoyed working with those guys. And then after I got off the book, it disappeared within an issue or two, I think. So I'm not sure I kept it afloat. I'm sure it wasn't doing that well, but it was kind of fun. It was fun to do. It was fun to work with those guys.
I got to look it up. I didn't know anything about this.
Yeah, it's fun. It's just it's like a team book with like 4 or 5 characters in the team, and there's one issue of I'm going to say Gen 13 Wildstorm. Could be wrong. There was a crossover between Top Cow and Wildstorm, between Weapon Zero and Gen 13. And it's credited both me and Wheezy, but Wheezy was actually sick at the time, so I ended up really writing it. And then I penciled and inked it. That came out well. That issue I inked entirely with a brush, except for the grill on some car where I used a pen. Kind of sorry I did now, because now that's the only part I didn't do with a brush. I didn't do a lot of brush inking back then, and I just wanted to see if I could do it. And actually, it came out really nicely. So if Gen 13 something, if you punch in Gen 13 and my last name, and Weapon Zero, you'll probably find what comic it is. But that was nice. And there's some drawing in there I like a lot.
I guess we'll end here talking about one of the greatest comics of all time was your X-Men Teen Titans. You know,
that was fun.
Yeah.
Although I look at it now, I go, my God, what a lot of work. There's a page on Facebook called the Walt Simonson Appreciation page.
Yep.
I don't have a link to it, but anybody can join. It's run by a British fan of mine. He actually put the page up a few months at least before I even got on Facebook. And then very kindly asked, when I got on, he asked if I wanted to take it down. I said, no, of course not. Do whatever you want to do. So I see a lot of stuff on there I don't see elsewhere. I don't put up myself. But somebody there has been going through and cleaning out all the color on the X-Men Teen Titans book and putting up all the pages in black and white, based, I presume, on scanning the comic books. And I look at those and I just look and go, good God, what a lot of work. I can't believe we did that. But it came out well. It was a good story. Chris wrote a really nice story, and we managed to get it all crammed into 62 or 63 or 64 pages, whatever. So it was fun.
Yeah.
Drawing New York was a bitch, but otherwise it was nice.
Yeah.
And Chris wrote a great story. I thought he really caught all the characters, including the Teen Titans, pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Really. So, and here's one more story about that, and then we can bail. Then I'll go take my nap for real. Which
I'm sorry to keep you up.
Oh no, you're not really. In fact, we get done here, I'm going to go down and start looking at the rest of these Xeroxes to see how I can find what I'm looking for. But when we met for lunch, me, Wheezy, Len Wein, and Marv Wolfman, and probably Chris, for a lunch before we got started. Marv, of course, was the Teen Titans writer. Chris wrote the X-Men, and Len was the DC liaison. The way those crossovers worked, there were 4 of them originally: Superman, Spider-Man, Hulk, Batman, X-Teen Titans. And the way that worked was DC produced the first one, Marvel the second, DC the third, Marvel the fourth. And that meant that for each of those books, whoever was producing it, you used all Marvel talent or all DC talent. And there was somebody at the other company that would keep watch over you to make sure you didn't screw up their property. Len was the watchman for DC at that time. We were talking about stuff at dinner, at lunch, and about what villains to use. And Wheezy and Chris and I already discussed doing Dark Phoenix and Dark Side. That'd be great.
Yeah. And
Len was cranky about that. And he was cranky about it because Darkseid was not a Teen Titans villain.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I get it. But the only cosmic Teen Titans villain they had at that time, the book hadn't run very long yet, was Trigon. Now, I didn't realize George had designed Trigon. I had not seen it. I read a bunch of the early issues. We were getting set to do the book. But there was a fill-in issue that I believe Kurt Swan had drawn with Trigon. And, so it's a pre-Kirby kind of drawing. It's a guy with 4 eyes, literally, and reindeer antlers.
Right.
And I thought, really? This is the guy you want to put in the book? And I hadn't seen George's version. If I had, maybe I'd have had a different thought. But Darkseid is the best villain DC has.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. So, and I thought, man, if we have to do Trigon, I'm not drawing this book. I didn't say that. But I thought it. And so we're kind of reached this impasse. And Marv spoke up. He said, well, in the Teen Titans, there's the Terminator, the Destroyer. What is it? What was his original name?
Deathstroke the Terminator.
But he was also the word destroyer in there somewhere. It wasn't just because they eventually, I think when the movie Terminator came out, they dropped the Terminator name for that reason.
Slade
I don't remember. He had some other name. He had some double name. So, and Marv said, this guy, he's an assassin or a mercenary, whatever he is, but he's a mercenary. You can hire him. And Darkseid works through a lot of intermediaries. So conceivably, he could hire the Terminator and he could be part of the story. And then Lem was totally cool with that. So that's why there are 2 DC villains and only 1 Marvel villain. Because nobody at Marvel cared about leveling up to put an extra Marvel villain in that book. And that's why we have 3 villains instead of just 2.
Yeah. It's such a good, and I remember where I was reading that one too.
No, well, cool.
I was at a family party. Everybody's eating cake, and I'm sitting on a couch reading the comic book. It was that good.
You missed all those calories.
Better than cake. That's going to be my review.
No, there you go. Fair enough.
But thanks a lot. We've been talking for 2 hours, man.
I think we're done.
I could listen to you forever. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Last, the chat was going like you wouldn't believe, and I can't wait to see Ragnarok come out again.
So if I leave this, I mean, you're going to shut us both off. But I leave my screen open. Are all the comments still going to be here to read?
It's going to be on YouTube. I'll send you.
Right.
I sent you a link.
YouTube, so
it'll be on
YouTube,
that is. But it usually takes a couple of hours before the because we film this on StreamYard, then it transfers over to YouTube. It usually takes a couple of hours.
All right, no problem. Not in any real hurry, but I would be curious to sit down and really read the comments as I go through them.
Okay.
So
yeah.
thank
you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. This is such a pleasure. I love your comics. I'm such a fan. I kind of stumbled on stuff because I'm still amazed that I'm talking with you. This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. All right, you guys all watching, be well. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'll see you. Bye-bye.